Who is winning the war with the Me-262? It is me, Squishface. I am back and doing a Beer Thunder. Now, I haven't done Beer Thunder in a while because I am now a full-time engineering college student for aerospace engineering, technically, which means I've had to start doing math after 10 plus years of not doing math, and that's been most of my time has been getting back to doing academic stuff and things, which this is not an academic channel. This is a War Thunder channel, so we're not going to talk about math all that much until it comes time to talk about math and stuff. And this is going to be a little bit of a shorter video. I just wanted to cover the Me-262 because the Me-262 in War Thunder Sim is one of the planes of all time, and it is a pretty thoroughly mediocre 7.0. I would argue that it is the worst 7.0 jet. It's the worst one to start out on for sure, just because all of its performance metrics are kind of decisively worse than every other jet that does jet things, and it also does not compete with props on the same terms. Like, there's some jets like the Yak-15 that, yeah, it's a jet, but it really behaves and kind of plays out kind of like a prop, whereas this plays out like a jet, but it's not a very good one. A plane like the F-80A5 is just better in every single way. Now, just because the F-80A5 is better, does that mean that the Me-262 needs to move down to 6.7? I would argue probably not. I don't think that every single plane in the game always has to be good or have its own special day where the try-hard stat patters can play it, because that's kind of what's going on here. Like, the guy that I'm fighting in the F-80 is a guy named Raymond, and he's not really a stat patter, but he's kind of a try-hard. And I get behind him, get into a dogfight. He's going to stall me out here. He's using his plane correctly. And this is a good fight. I think this is legitimately good. This is like part of the interesting aspects of the game, and kind of wish I could have more fights like this. But unfortunately, we really cannot, because there's kind of an underlying problem in the experienced sim community, which basically amounts to, well, if you kill an experienced sim player, instead of like coming back for more and wanting to keep playing the game, they leave, and then they go and they find a different game. So it means that a lot of this tier is experienced players chasing around hordes of noobs and then getting mad when they get killed by it. Like look at this guy's reaction. Like, he dies and he spends the next like 5 minutes in chat mauling that you're on a second account, reported, return to hangar, quit, and he goes and plays a different game. It means that the rest of this game is just farming bombers, just farming people that are clueless, which is kind of the bread and butter of sim. And it's really one of those catch-22s where people will complain about the event farmers and noobs and casuals ruining the game mode, but you can't really have a game mode if you don't have those people as constant targets, because the experienced players do not want to stick around half of the time. Like, this is another game, this is an earlier game where I have Raymond in the game on the opposite team. There's a guy named Heliboy on the opposite team, and there's a guy named, I think, Dunklerstein on the opposite team. And this game starts out where America, the US side, has a little bit more players, has better planes at 7.0. The F-80A5 is really, really good at this, and they should have an advantage. This should start out as a fairly interesting game. We come in behind a P-51H, and we're going to do the thing that jets do against props, which is just kind of extend away, maintain speed, and not try to get into a close-in dogfight, because the P-51H, once you get slow in this thing, just completely shits all over the Me-262. The Me-262 is not really all that maneuverable. It's not the worst. It's not completely a brick. It's just one of those kind of rough transitions in kind of the way planes play, where you're fine against early jets like the Su-9, the F-80, the F-whatever, the Navy plane that has 2 seats. You can kind of maneuver with those. The Swedish thing turns a little bit better, but doesn't maintain energy as well. You can kind of fight those, but props are rough, so you kind of just want to abuse your speed and extend away, get an energy advantage, let them get distracted, let another guy come in and try to dogfight the P-51, and he's going to try to stick to him, and I'm going to come back in and I'm going to shoot him. And this is also one of the things where I'm like, I don't really think that some of these jets need to be moved down, because at 6.7, if the Me-262 was there, it would just be kind of this gameplay. And while props versus jets is interesting sometimes, I don't think it's a really interesting dynamic as kind of like a permanent fixture. I don't think anyone really enjoys it unless they're the guy in the jet that is farming the props. That's also why, like, when people say that they want historical matchmaking, I'm like, do you really? Because I don't think you do, because a lot of the planes that I'm going to be fighting in this game are historical counterparts to the Me-262 if you wanted to do things based off the year. Like, the P-61 is a late war night fighter, and a lot of the newer players in this game, they're playing their props because they like them and they chose them, and that's fine. And if I play the Me-262 bad, if I stick a dogfight even with like something like a P-51D, the P-51D should win it. But also, because we're not clueless, because we kind of understand how this dynamic works, we're not going to do that. We're just going to come in, shoot, and then fly away. And if we keep doing this at kind of a larger scale, then everyone that's in a prop just doesn't get to do anything, just basically doesn't get to play the game. And on a map like this, because Gaijin has decided in its infinite wisdom that everyone wants to play in frickin' thunderclouds all the time, props can't really climb above you and have any kind of situational awareness. Like, they can go up to the cloud and sit above the clouds, but they can't dive on you at this point and, like, cut off your trajectory. The P-38L is another plane. That is a 1944 plane. It's the latest P-38 that we have in the game. And technically speaking, if they had kept using them in the European theater, the P-38 would have saw the Me-262. It's a bad matchup. Same thing here, B-17 doing the historical head-on approach thing, and he gets collapsed, and he is dead. And the Rush guy's going to keep switching his planes, and this is, like, he's a noob, he sucks, he's bad at the game, blah, 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 blah. But he's also playing the game. He keeps playing, which is more than I can say about some of the other people here, because their team is going to kind of collapse. Guys are just going to filter out and go, oh, I died, I don't want to play the game anymore, I'm not doing good, and if I'm not doing good, my interest is not there. Rush again, switches to the SPD, and the SPD gets collapsed. Now with the 262, the big thing that I do, the big thing that I learned from a friend of mine was to use vertical targeting. 800 meter vertical targeting will arc the trajectory of the guns up, which means that you do have a much better chance of hitting shots where you don't have to fire completely blind. Now, a lot of these shots that I do take are kind of completely blind. Like, I know the heading of the plane, and then I just move the nose way too far in front, hold down the trigger for a bit, and hope that they fly into it. It's not really... there's a science to it, but there's more of an art to it than I'd say a science. But we're going to come in. F80 is dogfighting the HE-162. We're going to pull up, get our deflection shot, and I think this is Raymond. So we hold it down, Raymond gets collapsed, exploded, and that's going to be his only death of the game, because after that death, after he's 3-1 or 4-1, he's gone. He quits. He's not going to stick around. So the 1 to 2 guys that had the potential to give me an interesting fight, that have like over 1,000 kills in sim apiece, all of those guys are gone. So at this point, I'm just kind of flying the Me-262 around and attacking people that are much less experienced than me. This is kind of the equivalent of like those Call of Duty streamers who complain about skill-based matchmaking, because then they have to fight people that are as sweaty as them, and they just want to get the noob farming clips. And we're kind of doing that here. Like, I can't complain. This is for me is fun once in a while, but I think it's kind of like the permanent state of the game mode would actually be really bad. It'd be really bad for anyone that actually wants to get involved in the game, beyond just kind of like the occasional kind of like LARPing, like, that was kind of neat aspect. Get behind Rush again. Poor guy. P-61C just gets collapsed by the cannons. I really do like the sound of the cannons. I really do like the damage of the cannons. The trajectory, the distance that they're effective at is really, really poor, but you do have a lot of ammo. And if you're faster than something, if you could just get close enough and just barrel stuff them, it works. And usually you can get away with killing people in one pass. Now, next target coming in, looks like we got some kind of prop. I think it's a P-51 with rockets. T-Rex is in the game. He's in his SU-11. That's the only Russian plane he has at this tier, so that's why he's playing it. And SU-11 is one of those planes that really does ruin 7.0. It's one of those planes that definitely should be up at 7.3 at a bare minimum. That could make it up to 7.7, but I think there's just a lot of power creep in that 7.0 to 7.7 range. Like, there are 7.0s that have absolutely no business whatsoever fighting things at like 7.7. Even the F80 variants, the F80A5 versus the F80C. The F80C is 0.3 BRs higher, and it is another like magnitude of performance gap over the F80 that even without the WEP, it's still just purely better. And once you move up to 7.7, I think you run into things like the LA200, which is the big 15. It might be 8.0 still. I haven't checked the BR and Sim, but you also start to run into things like Seahawks, things that are faster, things that accelerate better, things that turn better, where at 7.7, the SU-11 might end up being kind of mediocre. And I think the plane overall, the base model plane, the SU-9, is kind of mediocre. Now, the SU-11, because of the engine power, because of how forgiving it is, does not belong at 7.0. It would be OP at 7.3, but it would probably be correctly tiered to mediocre at 7.7, which is kind of the same boat that the Me-262 is in, where at 7.0, it sucks. At 6.7, it would be one of the strongest, if not the strongest 6.7, and that would attract a different kind of player that would want to play it specifically only on 6.7 days, and that means that everything else at 6.7, it might suffer a little bit. Now, as far as suffering goes, though, it's like the things that would be suffering are P-51Hs, Mark 22 or 24 Spitfires that they at least have an asymmetric matchup against the 262 where they turn better, they climb better, they're the best performing props, and they have good guns, and if they are sufficiently evasive, there's a dynamic to be had. There's an argument that could be made. I'm not going to make that argument just because I don't find props versus jets to be all that, like, exciting. I know for a fact that if it came down to it, if I'm going to fight someone who's a tryhard, who's in an Me-262, and I have to take a P-51H or a Mark 22 Spitfire, I know exactly what's going to happen. I'm going to get behind them, and then they're going to point their nose down and go 800 kph, and they're going to go straight back to the airfield and rotate around it until I have to turn around and leave. That is not a very interesting dynamic to me. And I don't think that should be an interesting dynamic to any player, to be honest, but that's kind of the reality that I see happening. So that's why I'm not going, yes, this plane needs to be moved down. It's just too bad at 7.0. And the other thing is at 7.0, like, I do fine with it. I enjoy playing it. I know that it's not good, but just because it's not good doesn't mean that it has no potential whatsoever. Because obviously, I can dogfight an F80, and I can win. Can I win consistently every time against every player? No, the F80 is a better plane. Even something like the Meteor is not a better plane because it's a different matchup. It's asymmetric insofar as that the 262 is at least faster, and the Meteor turns better, and probably accelerates better, and probably does a bunch of other things better, but at least that's asymmetric enough. The other thing is, this tier at 7.0 has a good number of premiums in it, has a good number of players that are just, it's not competitive enough to start with, that I'm really concerned about, like, the micro minutia of, like, little itty bits of plane performance. Now, if this was kind of the tier that a lot of people played, if this was as competitive as a lot of the prop tiers are, it maybe 6.7 would be fine. But once again, we have to look at the way that people play. And the way that people play, a lot of the time, a lot of the experienced players will gravitate towards whatever is the best for the VR on the best day under the optimum conditions, and then just will not deviate from that. And then that means that your meta is largely defined by how good something is for the tier on its best day. And it's also largely defined based on the players that are in the game. Because, yeah, the F80 is better, but the guy that was in the F80 that could be threatening left as soon as he died. So it means that even though the enemy team has the potential, all of these guys that we're fighting right now are just in a very early part of like their sim learning curve, and that's assuming they stick with it. And a lot of guys, unfortunately, probably don't. And I think one of the issues is if all of the experienced players are refusing to fight each other and are just kind of actively seeking out free targets in the form of easily farmed noobs, well, the easily farmed noobs are always going to be kind of transitory. Where trying to graduate the easily farmed noobs into not easily farmed noobs actually hinders the engagement of our older portion of the player base. And that's kind of what happens here. We get Jax Vex to come in, and usually he's in an area, and of course, it's a 7.0 day, he's in the F80, one of the strongest planes for the BR, and, well, he dies, and he's going to stick around. Like, Jax, not a huge fan of the guy, but, I mean, he does stick around for the most part. He will take his licks and keep coming back. So it's like, even though I don't like some players, I don't have to like everyone. I'll at least, like, give them credit. Like, I'll give people credit for doing things that are probably good for the game mode. At the same time, I'll give my friends not credit for doing things that are bad for the game mode. Like, playing the SU-11 at this tier is, probably bad for the game mode, but at the same time, like, I can't pick and choose like what everyone flies and like, oh, this is how you need to enjoy the game mode. You need to play the off meta thing all of the time. You should never play the meta thing. It's like, well, ideally you should be willing to play a little bit of everything and kind of test your limits and kind of do like a push and pull and be willing to put yourself in other people's shoes, because these guys here, a lot of them, this the scroll bar of skill issues, as they call it, is pretty long, and a lot of these guys probably didn't have a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun. I got 22 kills and no deaths, and it means that the 262 looks really good. But is it because the plane is good, or is it because of the player experience? And I would argue it's the player experience right now that matters, and I would have done a lot worse if the experienced players had stuck around and like actually used their meta plane to put some pressure on, and they just don't. And that's one of my biggest complaints about Sim. Anyways, that's going to be a Beer Thunder. That's kind of like our little update, little 17-minute video. We'll run the reward screen just to let you see what happened, see how much I got or how much I didn't get, and see you next time.